Ease. You spent years making one woman believe she was alone. Ryder Cole's voice cut through the Arizona night like a blade. Ease. He didn't raise it. He didn't behind him. Ease. The sound of 40 motorcycle engines idling in the darkness said everything words couldn't. Ease. Derek Holloway stood frozen, and for the first time in 15 years, ease. The man who had controlled Emily Carter's every breath understood what it felt like to be the one without power. Ease. Your mistake, Ryder said, was thinking. She still was. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. Emily Carter had a system. She had built it over 12 years of working the kitchen at Iron Spur Bar. And it was so practiced, so deeply worn into her muscle memory, that most nights she didn't even think about it anymore. The system was simple. Keep moving. Keep smiling. Keep your eyes pointed at whatever was in front of you, the grill. The cutting board, the pass-through window, and never, under any circumstances, let anyone catch you standing still. Because standing still meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering. And remembering meant feeling things she had spent years training herself not to feel. Red Hollow, Arizona in the late 1990s was the kind of town where everyone believed they knew everyone else's business. Which meant, of course, that the things people most desperately needed to know stayed perfectly hidden in plain sight. The town had 2 gas stations. 1 grocery store. A hardware shop that doubled as a gathering place for men who had nowhere better to be on Saturday mornings. And the Iron Spur Bar, which sat at the edge of Route 9 like a landmark that had simply always existed and always would. People drove from 40 miles away for Emily's cooking. Her fried chicken had a crust that shattered when you bit into it and meat so tender it practically fell away from the bone. Her pies pecan, apple, and a green child and cheese variety that had no business being as good as it was, sat on a rotating glass display case near the register. And on busy nights, the last slice was gone before 9 o'clock. She made her biscuits from scratch every morning, showed up at 5:30, even on nights when she'd closed at midnight. And she never once served something she wasn't proud of. The regulars said Emily Carter was the heart of the Iron Spur. They just didn't know how close to breaking that heart was. The night everything changed started like every other night. Emily arrived at 5:15. She unlocked the side entrance. The one nobody else used, shrugged off her jacket. Tied her apron, and started her prep work without turning on the radio. She had stopped listening to music during her shifts about 4 years ago. Derek didn't like it. He said it made her distracted. Made her slow. Gave her ideas. She had been so thoroughly trained to eliminate the things that gave her ideas that she had done it even here, in the one place Derek didn't control, or thought he didn't. The truth was, Derek controlled everything. He controlled which shifts she took and how long she stayed. He controlled the bank account her wages went into. Which meant he controlled whether she had gas money. Whether she ate lunch, whether she replaced the shoes that had developed a hole in the left sole that let cold water in on rainy days. He controlled her friendships, or rather the absence of them, by making it so thoroughly uncomfortable for her to maintain contact with anyone that one by one, over the years, those connections had simply withered and died. He had never needed to forbid her from having friends. He had simply made her too exhausted, too ashamed, and too uncertain of her own judgment to reach out to anyone. That was the thing about Derek Holloway, that the people of Red Hollow would never understand. Even after everything came to light. They expected a monster to look like a monster. They expected bruises and screaming and neighbors calling the police. Derek was nothing like that. Derek was charming. Derek coached youth basketball for three years and was quoted in the local paper saying that kids needed strong male role models. Derek organized a canned food drive every Thanksgiving and personally delivered boxes to elderly residents on the outskirts of town. Derek Holloway was the kind of man people trusted instinctively, which was exactly why Emily had stopped trusting her own instincts. If everyone else saw a good man, the problem had to be her. Ease. That was what she believed. For 12 years, that was what she believed. Ease. The dinner rush that Thursday hit harder than expected. Ease. A minor highway accident, about 30 miles east, had pushed travelers off the interstate. Ease. And by 6:30, every stool at the bar was occupied, and there was a 20-minute wait for tables. Ease. Tina, the only waitress working that evening, Ease, moved through the crowd with the efficient grace of someone who had been doing this for 20 years. Ease, calling orders through the pass-through with a sharpness that made everything sound slightly more urgent than it was. Ease. Emily worked through it without breaking stride. Plates moved. Ease. Orders turned. The kitchen stayed organized in that particular way a skilled cook's kitchen always does to an outsider. It looks like controlled chaos, but to the person running it, every surface and every pan has a logic that makes complete sense. By 8 o'clock, the rush was thinning. By 8:45, the last table of road-weary travelers had paid their check and headed back to their cars. And that was when the motorcycles arrived. Emily heard them before she saw anything, the deep, rolling thunder of multiple engines pulling off the highway. The crunch of gravel in the parking lot, voices carrying through the back wall, with the particular easy loudness of men who spent a lot of time outdoors and had stopped worrying about how much space their presence occupied. She didn't need to look. She knew who it was. The Iron Spur had been a stopping point for the Hells Angels chapter out of Flagstaff for going on 6 years. They had never caused a problem. They were, if anything, some of the better-behaved regulars she served. They tipped well. They didn't harass Tina, and they always cleaned up after themselves in ways that customers who looked far more respectable often didn't bother to. Emily had cooked for them dozens of times without ever speaking more than a few words directly to any of them. She preferred it that way. She preferred it that way with everyone. Ryder Cole came in alone. That was the first thing Tina noticed. Because Ryder almost never came in without at least 3 or 4 of his brothers. And she mentioned it to Emily through the pass-through while pulling a fresh pot of coffee. Your biker's here, Tina said. Just him tonight. Looks like he's been riding a while. He want food or just coffee? Both, probably. I'll ask. Emily didn't look up from the stove. Ryder had been riding since 4 that morning. He'd left Flagstaff before sunrise to make a run at Tucson. Handled business that needed handling, and was on his way back north when something made him pull off Route 9. He couldn't have explained it precisely. He was tired. Yes. Hungry. Yes. But he had passed the Iron Spur turnoff 100 times without stopping when he was solo. So what made him pull in that particular Thursday night was something he would think about later and still not have a clean answer for. He took a stool at the far end of the bar, the one closest to the kitchen pass-through. And when Tina came over, he ordered coffee, the chicken plate, and a slice of whatever pie was left. Pecan, Tina said. Last one. That works. He sat with his coffee and the particular stillness that comes from having spent most of a day alone on a motorcycle, that particular quality of quiet that isn't emptiness, but something more like being wrung out and hung up to dry. Waiting for the world to start making noise again. That was when he heard it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the sound of something breaking or someone shouting. It was softer than that, and because it was soft, it cut through the ambient noise of the nearly empty bar with a precision that something louder might not have managed. It was a woman crying, not sobbing, not making any kind of scene. Just the quiet, practiced sound of someone letting themselves feel something they had been holding back for hours. In the 3 or 4 minutes between the last table leaving and Tina putting in the next order, a sound that had the rhythm and cadence of something that happened often enough that the person doing it had learned exactly how much time they had before they needed to stop. Ryder set down his coffee cup. He didn't do anything else for a moment. He just listened. And then Tina came back through from the kitchen. Face carefully neutral in the way that said she'd seen this before and had made her peace with the fact that there was nothing she could do. And she put in his food order and didn't say anything. And Ryder said quietly, "Who hurt her?" Tina went still. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something between wariness and relief. Ease, like a door she hadn't dared open herself, was suddenly being knocked on from the outside. Ease, I don't know what you mean, she said. Yes, you do, Ryder said. Ease. He wasn't aggressive about it. He said it the same way he'd said everything else low, even, completely certain. The woman in the kitchen. Ease, who hurt her? Tina looked at the kitchen door. She looked back at him. Ease. She picked up the coffee pot she was holding, set it back down, Ease, and said very carefully, that's not my story to tell. Is there someone whose story it is? She didn't answer. Ease. But she didn't walk away either. Emily had no idea anyone had heard her. Ease. She had the water running, which is how she always masked it 30 seconds. Ease. 45 seconds of the faucet going full blast while she gripped the edge of the sink and let herself feel the things she'd been keeping below the surface all day. Ease. Then she turned off the water. Ease dried her hands. Ease. Wiped her face with the clean side of the dish towel. Ease. And put her professional expression back on like a piece of clothing she was very practiced at wearing. Ease. She was plating Ryder's food when Tina came back through. Ease. The guy at the end of the bar, Tina said quietly. Ease. Not looking at Emily, straightening a stack of plates that didn't need straightening. Ease, he asked about you. Emily's hands didn't stop moving. Ease. What do you mean he asked about me? He heard you. Ease, he wants to know if you're okay. Emily's jaw tightened. Ease. I'm fine. He doesn't think so. Well, she slid the plate through the pass-through. Ease, that's for him. Tell him his food's up and he's welcome. Tina took the plate without arguing. Ease. Emily stood at the counter for a moment after she left. Ease. Then she turned back to the grill and started scrubbing it down. Ease, which is what she did when she needed to put her hands somewhere so they couldn't shake. Ease. She was still scrubbing when the kitchen door opened. Ease, she didn't hear it open. The exhaust fan was too loud. Ease. She only knew someone was there when she turned around and found Ryder Cole standing just inside the door. Ease, his coffee cup in one hand. Ease, his hat in the other. Ease, making himself as small and non-threatening as a 6'2". Ease, 52-year-old man with 20 years of road history written all over him could possibly manage. Ease, you're not supposed to be back here, Emily said. Ease, I know, Ryder said. I'm sorry, he said it like he meant it. Ease, I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Emily looked at him with the flat, ease, measured expression she used on people who asked questions she didn't intend to answer. Ease, I'm perfectly fine. I appreciate your concern. Okay, Ryder said. Ease, he didn't move. Emily turned back to the grill. My name's Ryder, he said behind her. Ease, I've been coming in here, I don't know, 6 years maybe. Ease, you've fed me a few dozen times, never introduced myself. Ease, that's rude and I apologize. Emily didn't turn around. Ease, Emily, I know, he said. Tina told me. A pause. Ease, your food is the best between Flagstaff and Tucson. Ease, probably further in both directions. I just haven't been paying close enough attention. She said nothing. Ease, I'm not trying to pry, Ryder said. You don't have to talk to me. Ease, I'll go back to my stool, eat my chicken and my pie. Ease, leave you a good tip and mind my own business. I'm good at minding my own business. Ease, I just stopped. Try it again. I heard you in there. Ease, and I'm old enough to know what that sounds like, and I'd feel like a coward walking out of here and not saying something. Emily kept her back to him. Ease, her hands were still. The grill was clean. She had nowhere to put them. Ease, you don't know anything about my situation, she said. Ease, no, he agreed, I don't. So there's nothing you can say. Probably not, he said. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a cop. I'm not. He paused. Ease, I'm not anything official. I'm just a man who heard a woman crying in a kitchen and didn't want to pretend he didn't. Silence. Ease. The exhaust fan ran. Somewhere out in the bar, a song Emily hadn't heard in years played faintly from the jukebox, something slow and country. Ease. The kind of song that made her chest hurt for reasons she couldn't entirely explain. Ease, my husband controls our finances, Emily said. She hadn't planned to say it. Ease. It came out of her the way things come out when you've been holding them so long and so tightly that your grip finally gives without permission. Ease. She still hadn't turned around. He tells me what shifts I'm allowed to work. Ease. He monitors my mileage so he knows where I've driven. Ease. He goes through my phone. He has people here in town. Ease. People who tell him things. If I talk to someone he doesn't approve of, ease, he knows about it before I get home. She stopped. Ease. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. I don't have any money of my own. I never have. I tried to open a savings account 6 years ago. He's, he found out. The account got closed. A pause. He's never hit me. That doesn't make it okay, Ryder said. No, Emily said. It doesn't. She turned around then. He was still standing where he'd been, hadn't moved an inch. Cup in one hand, hat in the other, giving her all the space the small kitchen allowed. She looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that is also a calculation measuring something. Trying to figure out whether what she was seeing was real or whether it was what she had taught herself to see, instead of what was really there. Which was what Derek had done to her for so long, made her doubt her own reading of every person and every room. Why do you care, she asked. Ryder considered the question seriously. She could see him thinking about it, not reaching for a quick, comfortable answer. Because somebody should, he said finally. She let him sit down. There was a stool in the corner of the kitchen, the one she used during slow shifts when she was doing prep work and her feet hurt. She gestured at it without quite looking at him, and he sat. And she put on a pot of coffee because doing something with her hands helped her think. He's not a violent man, Emily said. Not as a defense of Derek, but as a fact she was trying to fit into its proper place. People always expect, I think, when people say the word abuse, they expect something visible. Something that explains itself. Derek is, she stopped. He's very good at being reasonable. That's the hardest part. He always has a reason. He always makes the reason sound like common sense. You'd listen to him explain why he controls the bank account, and you'd think, he's just good with money. He just wants the bills paid on time. He just had still control. Ryder said, I know that. Now. I didn't always know that. She poured 2 cups. Brought one over without asking him if he wanted it. My mother used to tell me a good wife doesn't make waves. She said that from the time I was probably 8 years old. I heard it so many times it stopped being advice and started being just the way things were. She sat down on the prep counter, which she never did during a shift, because it wasn't professional. But Tina had gone home, and the bar was empty, and she was so tired that the counter was simply there, and her legs were simply grateful. When Derek started limiting things, I told myself it was love. That he was protective because he cared. And by the time I understood what it actually was, I didn't see a way out that didn't. She stopped. I have nowhere to go. My brother's been gone for years. I know savings. I've no one here who isn't also someone Derek knows. If I try to leave and I fail, what happens after is worse than what I'm living with now. Ryder was quiet for a moment. Tell me about your brother, he said. Emily looked up from her coffee cup. Why? Because you mentioned him, Ryder said. And the way you said it, he paused. I lost people too. I know how that sounds when someone says it without saying it. Emily held the cup in both hands and let the warmth work into her fingers. He's Michael, she said. Michael Carter. He was 4 years younger than me. He was a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite grief. He was the opposite of me. I was always quiet, always careful. Michael went through life like he was trying to make sure it knew he'd been there. She looked at the window above the sink. At her own reflection, at the darkness behind it. He died 11 years ago. Highway accident. He was a biker. She stopped. Something shifted in Ryder's face. It was slight. If she hadn't been watching him, she would have missed it. What was his chapter? Ryder's voice was very controlled. I don't know. I didn't follow that world. He always said it was better. I didn't know details. She looked at him. Why? Ryder set down his coffee cup. He was quiet for longer than was comfortable. And the quality of his silence had changed. It had a weight to it now. A density, like a room right after something important has been said, and everyone is still working out what it means. 11 years ago, he said slowly. Highway accident. His name was Michael Carter. Emily felt something cold move through her. Not fear exactly. Something stranger than fear. You knew him, she said. It wasn't a question. Ryder looked at her directly. His eyes gray-blue, weathered, the kind of eyes that had seen enough of the world to have stopped being him surprised by most of it, were not what she expected. They looked sorry. Michael Carter saved my life, Ryder said. On Highway 89, In the summer of 1987, a tractor trailer came across the line and he pulled me out of the way. He didn't get all the way clear himself. He paused. He wasn't with us yet at that point. He'd been riding with a group down from Utah. We brought him in after. He was one of us for 4 years before he died. Another pause. Heavier than the one before. He used to talk about his sister. A woman who could cook better than anyone he'd ever known. He said she worked at a bar in Red Hollow. Ryder's voice was rough now. Like something had scraped across it. He made me promise. If his family ever needed anything, if his sister ever needed anything, we came. No questions. We came. Emily couldn't speak. I've been coming in here for 6 years, Ryder said. Eating your food, sitting in your bar. He looked at the table in front of him. At the coffee cup, at his own hands. And I never asked your last name, she cried. Not the controlled, timed, private things she did when she thought no one was listening. She cried the way people cry, when something breaks open that they've been pressing shut for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like not to press ugly. Unguarded, with her elbows on the prep counter and her face in her hands and no system for making it stop. Ryder didn't try to stop it. He didn't touch her or move toward her. He simply stayed where he was, on that corner stool. And let it happen. And when it started to slow down, he got up quietly and brought her a clean towel from the stack by the sink and set it next to her without a word. She pressed the towel to her face. She breathed. When she came back up, he was sitting again, both cups refilled. I don't want you to do anything, Emily said. Her voice was thick, but her words were careful. I need you to understand that. I'm not asking for anyone to ride in and fix this. I've been in this long enough to know that when it blows up badly, I'm the one who pays for it. Not Derek, me. I understand, Ryder said. Do yes. He meant it. I'm not going to do anything you don't want me to do. I'm not going to make a move without your say-so. That's not, he stopped. That's not how this works. Not with me. Not with my brothers. He looked at her steadily. But I need you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever you decide, whatever you want, you're not alone. You haven't been. Actually. But I didn't know that. And I'm sorry it took this long for someone to sit down and say it. Emily looked at him. She thought about the bank account Derek had closed. She thought about the friends who had drifted away. She thought about the morning. 2 years ago. When she had sat in her car in the parking lot of the grocery store for 45 minutes because the thought of going home was physically difficult. And she hadn't had anyone she could call, and she had finally driven home because there was nowhere else to go. She thought about Michael. She thought about a promise someone had made to a man who was already gone. He always thought someone would look after me, she said quietly. He was right, Ryder said. Outside in the parking lot, a single motorcycle sat under the light. Inside the kitchen, a woman who had spent 12 years making herself invisible sat across from the kind of man she had stopped believing existed. And the decision she'd been unable to make for longer than she could remember was no longer something she had to make entirely alone. She didn't decide anything yet. She just stopped pressing. And for the first time in 12 years, the thing she'd been holding back simply breathed. It was close to midnight when Ryder finally stood to leave. He put on his jacket slowly, the way a man does when he doesn't want to make anything feel rushed. When he wants the end of something to be as unforced as the beginning. Emily was standing by the sink, drying the last of the pots. Her back to him again, but different. This time, the tension in her shoulders had shifted. Was carrying something different than it had been 3 hours ago. How do I? She stopped. Try it again. If I decide I need, how do I reach you? Ryder reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a card. In white. It's just a number, no name. He's no insignia. He set it on the counter next to the clean stack of dish towels. That's my personal phone, he said. I answer it myself. Nobody screens it. Emily looked at the card without picking it up. He checks my phone bill, she said. Then don't use your phone, he thought for a moment. Tina know where you live? Yes. Then when you're ready, you tell Tina. Just tell her you spoke with me. She'll get word to me. He paused. Ease. No rush, no deadline, no pressure. When you're ready. Emily nodded once. Ease. He moved toward the kitchen door. Ryder. She said his name like she was testing how it felt to say it. Ease. He stopped. She was still not looking at him. Michael would have liked that you came in tonight. Ryder was quiet for a moment. Ease. Yeah, he said. I think he would have. He walked back out through the bar, ease through the front door, out into the dry Arizona night. Ease. His motorcycle started on the first try. He sat on it for a moment without moving. Ease. Looking at the lights inside the iron spur through the window. Ease at the shape of Emily, moving behind the glass, still working. Ease. Still moving, still keeping the system going. Then he reached for his phone. He had a call to make. Not too soon. Ryder didn't sleep that night. He got back to the chapter house in Flagstaff at 1:30 in the morning. Parked his bike, walked straight past the common room where two of his brothers were still up playing cards. Went to his office in the back and sat down in the chair behind his desk without turning on the light. He sat there for a long time. The card he'd left on Emily's counter, he had 4 more of them in his jacket pocket. He'd given them out maybe 3 times in 20 years. Not because he was stingy with the number, but because when he gave someone that card, it meant something specific. It meant he was personally in. Not the club, not a favor chain, not a call put out to whoever was closest. Him. Personally. He tried to remember the last time he'd sat in this chair in the dark thinking about a promise. He knew exactly when it was. 1991. Michael Carter's funeral. Michael had been 28 years old. He'd been riding with the chapter for 4 years, and in those 4 years, he'd become the kind of man other men unconsciously from themselves around, not because he was the loudest or the toughest, but because he had a way of making every room feel like a place where things could actually get resolved. He was funny without being cruel. He was blunt without being unkind. He was the first person Ryder had ever met who could tell someone a hard truth and have them walk away feeling grateful. At the funeral, which was small, a few brothers, a woman from Michael's past who didn't stay long. No family. Ryder had stood at the grave and made the kind of promises a man makes when he has nothing else to offer the dead. He'd said, if your family ever needs us, we come. He had meant it. He had also, over 11 years, quietly stopped expecting it to matter. And now he sat in his dark office, thinking about a woman, crying alone in a kitchen and understanding that the universe had a patience for these things that he did not. He picked up the phone. Danny Reyes picked up on the second ring, which meant he wasn't asleep, which Ryder had known because Danny was never asleep before 3 and rarely before 4. It's me, Ryder said. I know it's you, Danny said. You're the only person who calls this late and doesn't apologize for it. I need you to remember something with me. A pause. Danny was 39, had been with the chapter for 12 years, and was the person Ryder trusted most with the kind of work that required both precision and discretion. He had a memory for details that bordered on uncomfortable and a habit of staying quiet when staying quiet was the right thing to do. He's Michael Carter, Ryder said. Danny was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I remember him. Before my time, but I heard the stories. He had a sister. Emily Carter. She's in Red Hollow. She's been in Red Hollow the whole time. Ryder stopped. She's been cooking at the Iron Spur for 12 years. We've been sitting at her bar, Danny. We've been eating her food. The silence on the other end was the particular kind that meant Danny was processing something that didn't sit right. We didn't know, Danny said finally. No, we didn't know. She didn't know who we were either. Not really. Michael kept her separate from all of it. He thought he was protecting her. Ryder leaned forward in his chair, elbows on the desk. Her husband's got her locked down. Financially, socially, all of it. No accounts of her own. No freedom of movement. People in town feeding him information about her. She's been living like that for over a decade. Does he touch her? Not the way people expect. But what he does, Danny, what he does is worse in some ways. Because there's nothing visible, nothing she can point to. She's been doubting her own reality. For so long she doesn't fully trust what she sees anymore. Danny exhaled slowly. What do you need right now? Nothing. She hasn't asked for anything. She needs to get there on her own terms. Ryder stopped. I need someone to know. Someone who knew Michael. I didn't know him personally. No. Please. But you know the promise. Yeah, Danny said. Please, I know the promise. Emily drove home at 12:45. Taking the long way as she always did, not because the long way was faster, but because it bought her an extra 11 minutes before she had to walk through the front door. 11 minutes was enough to rebuild the face she needed to wear inside that house. The face that was agreeable, that was tired in an acceptable way. That wasn't carrying anything Derek might want to excavate and examine. She had gotten very good at it, but tonight the face was harder to build. Because something had happened in that kitchen that she couldn't fully categorize. And the part of her that had learned to flag anything unusual as a potential danger was sending up signals she was having trouble sorting. A man had sat with her. A man had listened. A man had told her she wasn't alone. And instead of feeling like a line designed to get something from her, it had felt factual, simple, like being told the temperature outside. She had spent so long with Derek that she had started to confuse sincerity with strategy. She sat in the driveway for 3 minutes. She built the face. She went inside. Derek was awake. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop, which meant he had been waiting not out of concern but out of habit. The habit of keeping a thumb on whatever was moving. He looked up when she came in with the particular blankness that she had learned to read the way some people read weather. Late tonight, he said. Highway travelers, we got slammed early. Cleanup took longer. She set her purse on the counter without looking at him. You eaten hours ago. He watched her move around the kitchen. Tina closed with you, she left early. Her kid was sick. So you closed alone. I always close alone. He said nothing for a moment. Which was its own kind of statement. Anyone I know come in tonight? Emily's hands did not stop moving. She ran water over a dish that was already clean, dried her hands, folded the towel with the precision of someone who does not let their hands do anything that looks like hesitation. Travelers, she said. Nobody from town. It wasn't entirely a lie. Ryder wasn't from town. She went to bed and lay in the dark listening to Derek's footsteps move around the house. For the next 40 minutes, and she thought about a card she hadn't picked up, and a number she hadn't memorized, and a brother who had made a man promise to look after her and then gone and died before he could tell her about it. She thought, Michael, you should have warned me. She thought, Michael, how long have you been trying to send someone? Tina Briggs had worked at the Iron Spur for 9 years, and in that time she had perfected the art of seeing everything and saying nothing. It wasn't cowardice. It was self-preservation of a specific kind, the kind that develops in women who work in service industries in small towns where everyone knows everyone and the consequences of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person are both immediate and lasting. Tina had 2 kids, a mortgage on a small house on the east side of town, and exactly zero desire to lose the job that paid for both. But she had spent 9 years watching Emily Carter. And watching Emily Carter had been, in its quiet way, one of the more painful ongoing experiences of Tina's life. She knew about Derek. Not everything, not the details. Emily had never told her the details. But she knew, in the way women know things that aren't said directly, through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small observations. The way Emily checked her phone when it buzzed and her face changed. The way she never accepted an invitation to anything outside of work. The way she sometimes flinched at nothing, at a raised voice from the bar. At a door swinging open too fast with the reflexive wariness of someone whose nervous system had been recalibrated to expect impact. Tina had tried once early on. She had said, carefully, over shared coffee in the slow hours of a Tuesday afternoon. If you ever needed to talk to someone, I'm here. Emily had smiled the polite smile and said she was fine and changed the subject. And Tina had understood the way you understand these things. That pushing would only make Emily seal herself more tightly shut. And so she had stopped pushing and just stayed close. Stayed available. Stayed consistent. Made sure Emily knew, without saying it, that the door was open. When Ryder Cole had walked into the bar that Thursday night and asked her directly who had hurt the woman in the kitchen, Tina had felt something drop in her chest, the specific kind of relief that comes when someone with more leverage than you have finally arrives. She didn't tell him anything Emily hadn't already chosen to say. But she didn't stop him from walking into that kitchen either. The next morning, Tina showed up early. Emily was already there. 5:30 on the nose, apron tied, working the prep list. You okay, Tina said. I'm always okay, Emily said. Emily kept cutting. I'm okay, Tina, I'm actually, she stopped. She set the knife down. She put both hands flat on the cutting board and stared at them for a moment. He knew Michael. Tina went still. She knew about Michael. Just enough that there had been a brother and that the brother was gone. And that losing him had carved something out of Emily that had never fully grown back. Ryder Cole? Tina said. Michael saved his life. Emily said it like she was still testing whether it was real. On a highway. 11 years ago, Michael saved his life and Ryder promised him. He promised Michael that if his family ever needed anything, she stopped again. He's been eating here for 6 years. He didn't know. Tina sat down on the stool in the corner of the kitchen. My God, she said softly. Michael always thought someone would look after me, Emily said. Her voice was controlled, but something behind it was not. He thought he was setting something up, a safety net. He just didn't tell me about it, but she made a sound that was almost a laugh. So completely, Michael, setting up before he could explain the system to the person the system was supposed to help. Emily, I'm not asking you to do anything, Emily said quickly. She picked up the knife again. I just wanted you to know. Because he said if I needed to reach him, I could tell you. He said, just tell Tina. I spoke with you and she'll get word to me. She looked over at Tina. So now you know. I haven't decided anything. I'm just now you know. Tina held her gaze for a long moment. Okay, she said. Now I know. She got up from the stool, poured herself a coffee, and picked up a prep knife. She didn't make a big thing of it. She just started helping. Ryder spent the next 4 days doing what he always did when he was working a problem that needed to be worked carefully. He gathered information without gathering attention. He made calls. He asked questions sideways, not about Derek Holloway directly. Not yet, but about the business landscape in Red Hollow. About who had influence in that town. About the kind of man who sat on local boards and organized charity drives and ran his operation in the gray space between legal and not. What came back surprised him, not because Derek Holloway was worse than he'd expected. Because the people who were afraid of him were more numerous than he'd understood. A man named Curtis Webb called him back 3 days after Ryder had reached out to a mutual contact. Curtis was 61. He's ex-military. Ran a small trucking operation out of Kingman. And had done business in Red Hollow for years. He spoke carefully. With the measured cadence of someone who had learned to choose words like a man choosing footholds on a steep slope. Holloway, Curtis said. Yeah, I know who he is. What do you know? Ryder said. I know his construction company won 3 county contracts in 4 years that should have gone to competitive bids. I know there's a county commissioner named Bates who bought a piece of land from Holloway at well under market value 6 months before those contracts were awarded. I know 2 guys who tried to raise questions about the bidding process, and both of them had licensing issues show up about 6 weeks later. Curtis paused. I know a woman who worked in his office for 2 years who left so fast she didn't take her personal photos off the desk. She won't talk about it. Not to anyone, Ryder said. What's her name? Another pause, longer. Her name is Sandra Pruitt. She's in Sedona now. I won't give you her number without asking her first. That's fair. I'll call her, Curtis said. I'm not promising anything. She spent 2 years putting that situation behind her. But I'll call her and I'll tell her who you are and I'll let her decide. That's all I'm asking. Curtis hung up. Ryder sat back. Derek Holloway was not just a man who controlled his wife. He was a man who controlled things, who had built an infrastructure of leverage and favors and quiet threat that reached across an entire county. Emily had said he had people in town who reported to him. She hadn't known how right she was. The woman wasn't dealing with a bully. She was dealing with a machine. Sandra Pruitt called Ryder herself. 2 days later, 8 o'clock in the morning, a Sedona area code he didn't recognize. Curtis Webb says you're trustworthy, she said without preamble. He says you're the kind of man who keeps his word. I'm taking that on faith because I don't have another option, and I am very tired of doing nothing. Her voice was clear and even and had the contained intensity of someone who had been waiting for an opening. Tell me what you know, Ryder said. I know where the bodies are buried. Metaphorically speaking, Sandra said. I kept copies of everything. When I left, I didn't take my photos because I was in a hurry. But I took my files. I took everything I couldn't prove he was doing wrong in the moment, but that I knew I might need later. A pause. I've had 2 years to organize it. Ryder was quiet for a moment. Why haven't you gone to anyone with it? Because I went to one person. Sandra's voice didn't change, but something behind it did. I went to the county DA's office 18 months ago. I spoke to an assistant. 3 weeks later, Derek called me at my home in Sedona. He said it had come to his attention that I was making some troubling claims about his business practices, and that he hoped I understood the legal consequences of defamation. She let that sit. He has someone in that office. I don't know who. I don't know how high. But he has someone. Ryder closed his eyes for a moment. Okay, he said. I'm not backing down, Sandra said immediately. I want to be clear about that. I backed down once, and I've hated myself for it every day since. But I can't go back in through the same door. I need a different door. Her voice was precise. Almost businesslike. Curtis says you open doors, sometimes, Ryder said. What would it take for you to be willing to come Red Hollow? A pause. These numbers, she said. I need to not be the only one. One woman with files gets dismissed. One woman with files, plus other witnesses, plus financial documentation, plus someone who can apply pressure that isn't legal pressure that's different. That's a case. I can get you numbers, Ryder said. Then call me when you're ready, Sandra said. And she hung up. Emily told Tina on a Wednesday. She didn't plan it. She was in the middle of the lunch prep, working through a large batch of pie dough, and Tina was refilling napkin dispensers at the bar. And the words came out of Emily's mouth through the pass-through, without any particular announcement. Derek is running schemes with the county. I've known for years, and I never said anything. Tina's hands stopped moving. How long, she said. I found out about the first contract about 5 years ago. I found a set of papers in his office that I wasn't supposed to see. There was money going to a county official. I know the name. I know the amount. I know the date. She worked the dough. Pressing and folding. I took photographs. On a disposable camera I bought at the drugstore during lunch and paid cash for. Because even then I understood that digital anything was something he could access. She looked up through the pass-through at Tina. I have the photographs. I have them somewhere he doesn't know about. Tina walked slowly up to the pass-through and stood at it. Where? She said quietly. In Michael's things, Emily said. A box I kept when he died. Derek thinks it's just sentimental stuffed books. A jacket, a few photos. He's never looked through it because it bores him. And he's never thought I had the nerve to put anything important there. She held Tina's gaze. He underestimates me. He always has. It's the one mistake he keeps making. Tina stared at her. Emily, she said softly. I know, Emily said. She went back to the dough. I know. This changes things. I know it does. She pressed her palm flat into the dough. I want to talk to Ryder. Tina nodded. She didn't go back to the napkin dispensers. She went to the phone in the back and she made a call. Ryder came back to Red Hollow the following Friday evening. He came in the same way he always did, alone, no announcement. Bike on the gravel, stool at the end of the bar. He ordered coffee and the chicken plate and waited. Emily came out of the kitchen. She had never done that before. In 12 years, she had never come out of the kitchen during a shift for anything that wasn't a delivery emergency. She wiped her hands on her apron, walked through the bar to the far end, and sat down on the stool next to his. The two other customers in the bar, a couple in a corner booth, tourists, by the look of them, didn't even look up. I have photographs, Emily said quietly. Evidence of a bribe between Derek and a county commissioner. He's 5 years old but documented. Ryder's expression didn't change. He was looking at the counter. What kind of documentation? Disposable camera. Photographs of papers laid out on a table. The papers showed a payment amount, a date, a property transfer, and 2 signatures. She folded her hands on the bar. I also know the names of at least 4 workers Derek had fired after they filed safety complaints. He had the complaints buried through someone in the county labor office. I don't have documentation on that, but I know names and I know dates. The workers, Ryder said. Are any of them still in the area? 2 of them. One moved to Phoenix, one I don't know about. She paused. There was also a woman who worked in his office. She left suddenly, about 2 years ago. I don't know where she went. But her name is Sandra Pruitt. Ryder said nothing for a moment. Then he said, I know where Sandra Pruitt is. Emily looked at him sharply. She called me, he said. She has documentation of her own. She's been waiting for the right opening. He picked up his coffee cup. She said she needs numbers. Witnesses. She needs to know she's not alone. Emily absorbed that. She's not alone, Emily said. No, Ryder said, she's not. The tourist couple in the corner booth asked for the check. Tina drifted over to take it. The bar was quiet in the comfortable, unremarkable way bars get in the slow hour of a Friday evening before the real crowd arrives. And at the end of the counter, a woman who had spent 12 years made invisible was sitting next to a man who had spent 4 days learning exactly how large her enemy was. And neither of them looked afraid. They looked like people working a problem. I need you to understand what Derek will do, Emily said. When he realizes what's happening. I need you to understand he has reach in places that might surprise you. I've been surprised before, Ryder said. I recover. The county DA's office, Emily said. He has someone there. Sandra went to them, and Derek knew about it in 3 weeks. Ryder nodded slowly. Then we don't go through the county DA, then who's state? Ryder said. And federal if the contracts had federal money in them. Which I suspect they did. If you go high enough, his reach doesn't extend. He looked at her directly. He's a big fish in a small pond. In a bigger pond, he's nothing. Emily was quiet for a moment. I've never thought of it that way, she said. He spent a lot of energy making sure you don't, Ryder said. Emily unfolded her hands on the bar and looked at them. The hands with the burn scars and the rough knuckles and the 12 years of kitchen work written in every line of them. The hands that had taken photographs on a disposable camera 5 years ago, with no plan and no courage yet, but some deep, insisting part of her that had refused to give up entirely. She had been braver than she knew. She had been building the exit for years, without admitting to herself that she was building it. What happens now, she said. Ryder set his coffee cup down. Now, he said, I make some calls. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. And he started. The calls Ryder made that night set 4 things in motion simultaneously. Danny Reyes started pulling financial records not through any channels that could be traced back to Emily, but through sources the club had cultivated over 2 decades that operated in the spaces between official record-keeping. What Danny found in the first 24 hours was more than they had expected, and worse than Ryder had hoped. The county contracts weren't the end of it. Derek Holloway had his name on 3 shell companies that appeared and disappeared over a 7-year period. Each one involved in a single county or municipal contract, and then dissolved before any audit could land cleanly. The pattern was sophisticated enough to require either very good legal advice or prior experience with exactly this kind of arrangement. Danny called Ryder at 6 in the morning. He's not a one-time opportunist, Danny said. This is how he operates. This is what he does. The construction business is legitimate, but it's also a front not for anything illegal exactly. But it creates the infrastructure, the relationships, the dependencies. He loans money to local officials through third parties. He provides services at below market rate and then calls in favors. The bribe Emily photographed is probably the simplest and cleanest thing he's done. Ryder listened without interrupting. How many people are tied to him, he said when Danny finished. He's in Red Hollow County, at least 6 people in official positions. He's maybe 8. Some of them are scared of him. Some of them are true believers who think he's a smart businessman and they're benefiting from the relationship and don't look too hard at the mechanism. Danny paused. He's the county DA writer. I looked at the DA's campaign finance records. Derek Holloway's name isn't on any of the donations. But 3 of his shell companies made contributions. The DA's been in office 6 years. Derek's been running schemes for at least 7. The silence between them had weight. Send everything to me encrypted, Ryder said. All of it. I'm going to need it. He hung up and stood in his office, thinking about Emily sitting at the bar the night before, with her hands flat on the counter and her voice steady and her eyes clear. She had been in there with all of this alone for 12 years. He picked up the phone again. He called Curtis Webb. I need a federal contact, Ryder said, clean. No overlap with county. Someone who handles financial corruption cases. Curtis was quiet for a moment. I might know someone. It'll take me a couple days. Take the time, Ryder said. Do it right. He put the phone down. He walked out of his office. Through the common room where 3 of his brothers were up and moving. Coffee in hand, mourning in their faces, church, he said. Not loud. He didn't need to say it loud. Tonight. All chapters. His brothers looked at each other. When Ryder called church, something was happening. They nodded and reached for their phones. By nightfall, word had gone to every chapter, from Flagstaff to Tucson to the group in Albuquerque that had stayed tight with the Flagstaff crew for 15 years. Men who had ridden together and fought together and buried each other and stood at the edge of graves making promises to the dead. Men who remembered a young rider named Michael Carter who had pulled a man out of the path of a truck on Highway 89 and never gotten all the way clear. They came because Ryder called, but they also came because of the name he said when he called. He said Michael Carter's sister needs us, and that was enough. Every single one of them said, we're coming. Derek Holloway noticed something different about Emily that weekend. He couldn't name it. He was good at reading her. He had spent 12 years learning exactly how she held herself when she was afraid versus when she was simply tired versus when she was hiding something. But whatever he was picking up now was new. And newness was the thing that worried him most. She was making dinner when he came home Saturday evening. Moving around the kitchen with a calmness that was too settled, too deliberate. The kind of calm that is not relaxation but intention. He sat at the kitchen table. You seem different, he said. I'm tired, she said. Different tired or just tired? She turned from the stove and looked at him directly. That was new too. She had stopped looking at him directly some years ago, not because he had told her to, but because she had learned through trial and error that direct eye contact from her tended to make him suspicious. Made him feel challenged in some way she could never fully predict. And so she had trained herself to look slightly past him, to address the middle distance. She was looking at him directly now. He's just tired, she said. He studied her. She held his gaze. After a moment, he looked away first. He didn't notice that. But Emily did. She turned back to the stove and she thought, I need to move faster than I thought. Emily moved the box on Sunday morning. She did it while Derek was at his weekly breakfast with the county commissioner, a standing appointment. Every Sunday, 9 o'clock. The kind of ritual that powerful men use to remind each other they are still powerful. He was always gone for exactly 2 hours. She had 45 minutes of safe margin on either side, which meant she had 1 hour to work with, and she had never once used that hour for anything other than the quiet, private breathing room it represented. This Sunday, she used it differently. She went to the spare bedroom closet, the one that held Michael's box behind a rack of Derek's seasonal jackets, and she pulled the box out and set it on the bed and opened it for the first time in 3 years. Michael's things were exactly as she had left them. The leather jacket, creased and worn at the elbows. A handful of photographs, real ones, printed on paper the way photographs used to be. A pocket Bible their mother had given him that he had carried without reading and kept without explaining why. And underneath all of it, wrapped in a cotton pillowcase she had put there herself 5 years ago, is the envelope. She held the envelope for a moment. Inside were 11 photographs from a disposable camera, developed at a drugstore 2 towns over on a Tuesday afternoon when she had told Derek she had a dentist appointment. 11 photographs of documents spread across Derek's desk while he was at a city council meeting. Payment confirmations, property transfer records, a handwritten note in Derek's own hand that listed an amount, a name, and the word done underlined twice. She had taken these photographs with shaking hands, using a camera she had bought with coins from the jar she kept at the back of the kitchen cabinet, the one she told Derek was for laundry quarters. She had taken the photographs and had them developed and looked at them, and then felt a terror so complete that she had wrapped them in the pillowcase and buried them under Michael's jacket and told herself she would know when the time was right. She had waited 5 years for the time to be right. She thought, Michael, I think this is it. She tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of her winter coat, the heavy one. The one Derek never touched because he ran warm and didn't understand why she needed something so thick. Then she put everything back in the box, put the box back behind the jackets, and smoothed the bed where she'd been sitting. She was in the kitchen making coffee when Derek came home. He looked at her. She looked back. Good breakfast, she said. Fine, he said. He set his keys on the counter. You look like you've been busy laundry, she said. You were out of clean shirts. He nodded and went to change. And Emily stood at the counter with her coffee and her coat hanging by the door and 11 photographs 3 feet away from the man who had controlled every corner of her life for 12 years. She had never felt more clear in her life. She gave the envelope to Tina on Monday. Not handed it over directly, that was too exposed. Too visible, too much of a moment that could be observed by anyone passing through. Instead, she tucked it into the bottom of Tina's bag during a slow mid-afternoon stretch when they were both in the back and the bar was empty. And she said quietly, give that to Ryder. Don't mail it. Don't scan it. Put it physically in his hands. Tina looked at the envelope without touching it yet. When, she said, as soon as possible. He's in Flagstaff. Then called Danny Reyes. Ryder gave me his name. He's the one Ryder trusts. Emily wrote the number on the corner of a receipt and tore it off and put it in Tina's bag with the envelope. Tell him Emily's ready. He'll know what that means. Tina zipped the bag. She looked at Emily for a moment with an expression that had no clean name, something between awe and sorrow, and the particular tenderness of someone watching a person do a brave thing. Are you scared? Tina said. Terrified, Emily said immediately. Without hesitation. But I've been terrified for 12 years, and it never stopped me from getting up in the morning. So, she turned back to the prep table. I'm used to it. Tina called Danny Reyes from her car in the parking lot during her break. He picked up on the first ring. Emily's ready, Tina said. She has photographs, physical prints, 11 of them. I have them. There was a pause on Danny's end, short and sharp. The kind that means something just clicked into place. Don't go home with those, Danny said. Don't put them in your house. Can you get to the Iron Spur and stay there until someone comes to you? I'm already at the Iron Spur, Tina said. Good, stay there, 2 hours. He hung up. Tina sat in her car for a moment. Then she went back inside and tied her apron and pretended it was a normal Tuesday afternoon. Which was the hardest acting she had ever done in her life. Danny made it in 90 minutes. He came in a truck, not a bike, which told Tina something without her knowing exactly what. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s. Compact, with quick eyes and the kind of stillness that reads as calm until you realize it's actually watchfulness. He sat at the bar and ordered coffee and waited until the one other customer left before he spoke. You're Tina, he said. Yes, you have something for me. She reached under the bar where she'd put her bag and she placed the envelope on the counter between them. Danny picked it up. He didn't open it. He put it inside his jacket. She okay, he said. She's terrified and she's calm and she's the bravest person I know, Tina said. She's okay. Danny nodded once. He put 20 on the bar for the coffee. Tell her Ryder says the wheels are turning, he said. Please, tell her not to change anything at home. Same routine, please. Same everything. Don't give Derek a reason to look closer. She knows that, Tina said. I know she does, he stood. Tell her anyway. Sometimes it helps to hear it from someone else. He was out the door in under a minute. Please. Tina stood at the bar holding the $20 bill and listening to his truck pull out of the parking lot. Please. Then she went to the kitchen. He came, she said through the pass-through. Please. Emily didn't stop cutting. Good, she said. The photographs hit Danny like a physical thing. Please. He pulled over 12 miles outside of Red Hollow and opened the envelope in his truck and went through the prints one by one. Please. Tilting them toward the window for the light, and what he saw made him sit back and stare at the dashboard for a full minute before he called Ryder. Please. She photographed an actual handwritten note, Danny said. Please, in Holloway's handwriting. With the commissioner's name, please, an amount 42,000 and the word done underlined. Please, Ryder, this isn't circumstantial. What condition are the prints? Clear. Please, slightly grainy because it was a disposable, but clear enough. Please, you can read every word. He looked at the photograph again. Please, the date on the documents she photographed, it's 6 weeks before the first county contract was awarded. Please, this is the setup. This is him establishing the arrangement before the work even went to bid. He paused. She's had this for 5 years. Ryder was quiet. She's been carrying this for 5 years, Danny said. And his voice shifted slightly on it, not unprofessional. But human, the way a voice shifts when something lands in the chest. I know, Ryder said. What do we do with them? Get them to Curtis. Curtis has the federal contact. We need those prints in front of someone who is completely outside Derek's network. Ryder thought for a moment. Don't make copies yet. Copies can be traced to where they were made if he has someone watching. Physical originals, chain of custody, Curtis to the federal contact only, understood. Danny put the prints back in the envelope. What about Sandra Pruitt? Sandra comes to Red Hollow this weekend. I've already talked to her. She's bringing her files, all of them. 2 years of organized documentation. Ryder paused. I'm also talking to 2 of the workers Derek had fired. One of them, man named Pete Garza, says he's willing to testify. He's been waiting for someone to ask. How many people did Holloway do this to? Danny said. The question was real, not rhetorical. The answer, Danny was beginning to understand, was more than any of them had known when they started. Enough, Ryder said. Enough that when we put them all in the same room, Derek Holloway is going to realize his world is a lot smaller than he thought. Sandra Pruitt drove herself to Red Hollow on a Saturday. She arrived in a sensible sedan with 2 large accordion folders on the passenger seat in the manner of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for 2 years and was simultaneously completely prepared and completely terrified. She was 53, small with precise movements and eyes that had the particularly focused quality of a person who has spent a long time being underestimated and has learned to use it. She came into the Iron Spur at 11 in the morning. Before the lunch crowd, and Tina recognized her without having met her, there was a quality of purpose about her that made her impossible to miss and brought her through to the back. Emily was at the prep table. She turned around and she and Sandra looked at each other for a moment. 2 women who had never met, standing in a kitchen in a small Arizona town, connected by the damage done by the same man. Emily Carter, Sandra said. Sandra Pruitt, Emily said. They shook hands. I should have come sooner, Sandra said. I wasn't ready sooner, Emily said. Are you hungry? I was about to make something. Sandra looked surprised. Then she put her folders on the far counter and sat down. Yes, she said. Actually, I am. They ate at the prep counter Emily's biscuits and leftover gravy from the morning prep, and Sandra talked while Emily listened. And Emily talked while Sandra listened, and what emerged between them over the course of an hour was the shape of a thing neither of them had been able to see clearly from inside it alone. He's systematic, Sandra said. That's what I kept trying to explain to people and nobody wanted to hear. They wanted a smoking gun, one bad act, one moment. But Derek doesn't work that way. He builds dependency. He builds obligation. He cultivates people over years, and then when he needs something from them, they feel like they can't say no, Because he's done so much for them. She shook her head. The county commissioner isn't some corrupt politician who took a bribe and knew it was wrong. He genuinely believes Derek is a community asset. He thinks what happened between them was a mutually beneficial arrangement between friends. Derek framed it that way from the beginning. That's how he works with people in his personal life too, Emily said. Sandra looked at her. He's never the villain in his own story, Emily said. He always has a reason. He always has a frame. By the time you realize what the frame is doing to you, you've been inside it so long you've started to believe it yourself. Sandra was quiet for a moment. I believed him for 14 months, she said. I worked for him for 14 months before I started to see the pattern. And even when I saw it, I made excuses for it. I told myself I was misreading. That I was being cynical. She picked at her biscuit. My husband kept telling me something was wrong with that job. He'd watch me come home and he'd say, Sandra, this man is doing something to you. I can see it happening. And I told him he was projecting. She looked at Emily. How long did it take you to stop making excuses? Emily thought about it. I don't know that I fully stopped, she said, honestly. Even now, part of me there's a voice that says he's not that bad. It's not that serious. Other people have it worse. I know that voice is wrong, but it's still there. That voice is what he built, Sandra said. That's not you. That's his construction. Emily absorbed that. Ryder told me something similar, she said. Your biker is smart, Sandra said. He's not my biker, Emily said, and then heard herself say it and felt something unfamiliar move across her face that she suspected was the beginning of a smile. Sandra noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. Ryder arrived at noon with Danny and 2 other chapter members. Pete and a man named Hollis, who had the build of someone who had spent 30 years doing physical work and the bearing of someone who had spent just as long thinking carefully before acting. They came in trucks, not bikes. Less noise, less visibility. Ryder had been deliberate about that. He came into the kitchen and saw Emily and Sandra at the prep counter and the 2 accordion folders stacked beside them. And something in his face settled in the way things settle when a plan that existed only in theory encounters its actual components for the first time and turns out to be real. Sandra, he said. Ryder, Sandra said. You look exactly like Curtis described you. How did Curtis describe me? Like a man who finishes what he starts. Ryder looked at Emily. You okay? He said. Better than I've been in years, Emily said, which was both completely true and a thing she could not have said 24 hours ago. They spread Sandra's files on 2 prep tables pushed together. And what they laid out over the next 90 minutes was a picture of Derek Holloway's operation that none of them had been able to see in its entirety before that morning. Sandra's files went back 7 years. They included internal communications from the office, financial documents she had photographed or copied before she left, a timeline she had constructed from memory and cross-referenced with public records, and a list of 18 names officials, contractors, local business owners who Sandra believed were either complicit, coerced, or both. Emily's photographs sat in the middle of it all. The handwritten note, the payment confirmation, the commissioner's name. Danny had spread them out in order, and they were looking at them when Pete Garza pointed at a number in the corner of one of the documents. That's the account number for one of the shell companies, Pete said. I know that number. It's on a check I was paid with severance. They called it, after they let me go. I kept it because something felt wrong. He looked at Ryder. I've still got that check. Uncashed. Every person in that kitchen went still. An uncashed check. A payment from a shell company to a worker who had been fired after filing a safety complaint. A direct financial thread connecting the shell company infrastructure to the suppression of workers. Pete, Ryder said carefully. Are you absolutely certain? I'm certain, Pete said. I kept it in a lockbox at my house because I didn't know what to do with it and I didn't want to lose it. I knew it meant something, I just didn't know what. Sandra looked at Danny. Danny looked at Ryder. We need Curtis's federal contact, Danny said. Now. Not this week. Now. Ryder had his phone out before Danny finished the sentence. The federal contact was an agent named Flores with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division out of Phoenix. Curtis had reached him 3 days earlier and primed him, told him there was a developing situation involving county contract fraud, possible public corruption, and multiple witnesses with documentation. Flores had been cautious but interested, which was the correct response from a federal agent being approached through unofficial channels. When Ryder called Curtis from the Iron Spur kitchen with the news about Pete's check, Curtis called Flores immediately. Flores called Ryder back in 14 minutes. Tell me about the check, Flores said. Ryder told him. The silence on Flores's end was the particular silence of a federal agent recalibrating the size of what he is looking at. I need to see it, Flores said. I need to see the check, the photographs, and the financial documentation in person. Can you get your witnesses to Phoenix? How soon? Ryder said. How soon can you get them there? Ryder looked around the kitchen. At Sandra, with her 2 years of organized files. At Pete, who had kept an uncashed check in a lockbox because something felt wrong. At Emily, who had hidden 11 photographs in a dead man's jacket for 5 years. 2 days, Ryder said. 2 days, Flores said. I'll clear my schedule. He hung up. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Sandra said, 2 days, 2 days, Ryder confirmed. Emily looked at the photographs on the table. At the handwritten note in Derek's precise, controlled handwriting. At the commissioner's name. At the word done underlined twice. He thought he was finished, she said quietly. When he wrote that word, he thought he was finished. He thought it was handled and buried and over. She looked up. He was wrong, she said. Derek knew something was wrong on Sunday evening. He had 3 sources in Red Hollow who kept him informed, an arrangement that had served him well for years. That he maintained through a combination of financial favor and the kind of social pressure that doesn't need to be stated explicitly to be completely effective. On Sunday evening, all 3 of them called him within 2 hours of each other. The first told him that a woman matching Sandra Pruitt's description had been seen going into the Iron Spur. The second told him that Ryder Cole had come to Red Hollow twice in 2 weeks, and that he'd brought men with him this time. The third told him that Pete Garza had been seen driving toward the highway with a bag in his car. Derek sat with this information for a long time. He had always known, in some cold and calculating part of himself, that Sandra Pruitt was a risk. He had handled her once, the call to her home, the mention of defamation, the casual reminder that he had reached and she had gone quiet, and he had assumed that would hold. He saw now that he had miscalculated. He had assumed her fear would outlast her resolve. It had not. And Emily. He thought about Emily looking at him directly across the kitchen table. He thought about the calm that was too settled, too deliberate. He thought, what does she know? He thought, what does she have? He went to his office and unlocked his desk and pulled out a burner phone he kept for situations that required a certain distance from his regular communications. He made 2 calls. The first was to a man in Kingman who handled problems that needed to be handled without documentation. The second was to the county DA. The county DA picked up on the third ring. We have a problem, Derek said. The DA's voice was careful. Measured. What kind of problem? The Pruitt woman is back. She's been in Red Hollow. She's been talking to people. Derek kept his own voice level. I need to know if anything has come through your office. Any inquiries, anything federal? A pause. Nothing's come through my office, the DA said. That's the problem, Derek said. If it's federal, it won't. You won't know until it's already moving. He let that sit for a moment. I need you to make a call. Someone in the Phoenix field office. You know who I mean. Derek, I need to know if there's an active inquiry. Derek's voice was still level, but something underneath it had sharpened. I have kept you completely clean throughout everything. Every arrangement we have made, I have made certain that nothing touches you directly. I am asking you for one call. A longer pause. I'll see what I can find out, the DA said. Today, Derek said, not tomorrow. Today. He hung up. Ease. He sat in his office and turned the burner phone over in his hands and thought about Sandra Pruitt's organized folders and Emily's strange calm and a motorcycle club president who had started coming to Red Hollow with men and trucks instead of bikes. Ease, he thought. How much do they have? He thought. Is there time? Ease. He made the third call, the one to Kingman. Ryder got the warning at 7:30 Sunday evening. Ease. It came from Curtis Webb, who had a contact in the county sheriff's department, not a corrupt one. Ease. One of the clean ones, a man who had served 20 years and had spent most of them quietly furious about the way Derek Holloway seemed to exist in a space outside normal accountability. Ease. The warning was simple. Derek had made a call to the DA. Ease. The DA had reached out to someone in the Phoenix field office, not Flores. Ease. Someone else. Someone whose loyalties weren't entirely clear. Ease. The inquiry would get back to Flores, but it meant Derek now suspected federal involvement. Ease. Ryder called Flores immediately. Your timeline just changed, he told the agent. Ease. Holloway knows something is moving. He doesn't know specifics, but he's going to start covering tracks. Flores's voice was sharp and immediate. Ease. How solid is your documentation? Solid enough. Ease. The photographs are originals. The check is in Pete Garza's lockbox. Ease. Sandra Pruitt's files are comprehensive. Emily Carter is willing to give a complete statement. Get them to Phoenix tomorrow, Flores said. Ease. Not 2 days tomorrow. I'll have them there, Ryder said. Ease. He hung up and started calling. Danny first, then Pete. Ease. Then Sandra, who said yes immediately in the voice of someone who had been waiting for this call. Ease. Then he went to the Iron Spur. It was 8:15. Ease. The bar had a handful of Sunday evening regulars. Emily was in the kitchen closing down. Ease. Ryder walked straight through to the back, and she turned around when she heard the door and looked at his face and knew. Ease. What happened? She said. Derek made calls, Ryder said. Ease. He knows something is moving. We need to go to Phoenix tomorrow. Ease. You, Sandra, Pete. We're meeting with an FBI agent named Flores. Emily stood very still. Ease. Tomorrow, she said. Yes, Derek will notice I'm gone. By the time he figures out where you went and why, it'll be too late to matter. Ryder looked at her directly. Emily. This is the moment. This is the door. But we have to go through it now. While it's open. She looked at him. 12 years of a locked house and a monitored phone and a bank account she can access, and a voice that had told her every day in 100 different ways that she was powerless and alone. She looked at the man who had walked into her kitchen because he heard her cry. She looked at the envelope she had carried in her coat for 2 days. She said, what time do we leave? 7, Ryder said. I'll have someone here at 6:45. Emily nodded once. She went back to closing down the kitchen. Her hands were completely steady. Outside in the parking lot, Danny was already on the phone. Making the arrangements, and somewhere in Red Hollow, a man named Derek Holloway was sitting in his office, turning a burner phone over in his hands and feeling, for the first time in a very long time, the particular cold sensation of not being in control. He didn't know yet what was coming. But something in him, the part that had spent years reading rooms and people, and exits something in him, already understood. The machine he had built, piece by careful piece over 2 decades, had developed a crack, and the crack had a name. It was the woman he had spent 12 years believing he had buried completely. He had been wrong about her from the beginning. He just hadn't known it until now. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark next to Derek and listened to him, breathe, and thought about every decision she had made in the last 2 weeks with the precision of someone running through a checklist they cannot afford to have wrong. The photographs were with Ryder. The envelope was out of the house. Tina knew everything. Sandra was in a motel on the east side of Red Hollow. Packed and ready. Pete Garza had driven home from wherever he'd been and would meet them at the Iron Spur at 6:50 in the morning. She had one thing left to do before 7 o'clock. She had to leave this house without Derek knowing why. She had rehearsed it. She had a story and early supply delivery at the bar. A vendor who only came through before 8, something she had invented that was routine enough to be believable and specific enough to not invite questions. Derek didn't pay close attention to the mechanics of the kitchen. He knew she sometimes came in early. The story would hold for the 2 hours she needed it to hold. 2 hours. By the time Flores had them in a room in Phoenix, these 2 hours would be enough. She watched the ceiling. Ease. Derek shifted beside her, and she went completely still the way she had learned to go still. Ease. The particular held breath, stillness of a woman who has spent years monitoring the sleep of the person next to her for signs of waking. Ease. He settled. She exhaled slowly. She thought about Michael. Ease. She thought about a highway in 1987 and a young man who had pulled someone out of the path of a truck and not gotten all the way clear himself. Ease. And she thought about the fact that everything that was happening right now, every piece of it, ease. Sandra's files, ease. Pete's check, ease. Ryder's phone calls, ease. The FBI agent in Phoenix who had cleared his schedule, all of it traced back to one moment on a stretch of road where her brother had made a choice without thinking. Ease. The way Michael always made choices, from the gut. Ease. From the chest, without hesitation. Michael had been trying to protect her from the very beginning. Ease. He had just needed someone to finish what he started. Ease. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she rested. Ease. And at 5:15, 45 minutes before her alarm, ease. She got up quietly and dressed in the dark and wrote a note in the kitchen that said early delivery, ease. Back by noon. And she walked out of the house she had been trapped in for 12 years and got in her car and drove toward the Iron Spur and did not look in the rearview mirror once. Ease. Danny was already there when she arrived. Ease. He was parked across from the bar in the truck, engine off, ease. Coffee in hand, and he got out when he saw her headlights and walked over without hurrying, ease, with the easy, unhurried competence of someone who is exactly where he planned to be at exactly the right time. Ease. How you doing, he said. Functioning, Emily said. Ease. She meant it as a complete answer. He took it that way. Sandra's on her way. Pete's 5 minutes out. He held up a cup. Ease. Coffee. I brought it for you. She took it. She drank it, standing next to his truck in the pre-dawn dark, and she thought, ease. This is what it feels like to have people on your side. Ease. It feels like a cup of coffee at 5:30 in the morning that someone thought to bring because they knew you would need it. Ease. It felt enormous. Sandra arrived at 6:40 in her sensible sedan with her 2 accordion folders in the back seat and the brisk, focused energy of someone running on preparation and purpose. Ease. She shook Emily's hand when she got out, the same way she had the first time, ease direct and without ceremony, and said, "You sleep?" "Not really," Emily said. "Ease. Me neither." Sandra looked at Danny. "Ryder?" "Meeting us in Phoenix," Danny said. "Ease. He left last night. He's been with Flores since 7 this morning going over the ground rules." Sandra nodded. "Ease. Smart established the framework before we walk in." Pete Garza pulled up at 6:52. Ease. 8 minutes behind schedule. And when he got out, he was holding a small metal lockbox under one arm with the careful grip of someone carrying something fragile. Ease. He was 61, compact, with the weathered hands of a man who had spent decades in construction and the straight-back dignity of someone who had never stopped being angry about being wronged. Ease. He looked at Emily. "I worked one of Holloway's sites," he said. Ease. 6 years ago. I filed a safety report. 3 days later, they told me my position had been eliminated. He held her gaze. Ease. I watched him shake hands with the mayor at the 4th of July parade the next year. Ease. I stood there with my wife, and I watched that, and she had to hold my arm. Emily held his gaze. Ease. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Pete said. Just let's finish this. He got in the truck. Ease. Emily got in after him. Danny pulled out of the parking lot at 7 o'clock exactly. Ease. They were 40 minutes down the highway when Emily's phone rang. Derek. She stared at the screen for 2 rings. Danny glanced at it in the rearview mirror. Ease. Sandra, sitting beside Emily in the back seat, didn't say anything. Ease. Emily answered. Hey, she said. Casual. Even, where are you? Derek's voice was flat in the particular way it went flat when he was working to keep something controlled. He's on my way to the bar. I told you early delivery. The vendor called the bar, Derek said. He's. Tina told him you weren't in yet. Emily felt the cold drop through her chest. He's. She had not told Tina about the vendor story. She had not thought Derek would call the bar directly. He's. She had underestimated, by one step, the reach of a man whose entire life was built on verification. Ease. She had maybe 30 seconds before the silence became its own answer. Ease. I stopped for gas, she said. I'm almost there. Tell Tina I'm 2 minutes out. A pause. Ease. Which gas station? Derek said. The one on Route 9, she kept her voice completely level. Derek, I'm going to be late if I keep talking. I'll call you when the delivery's sorted. She hung up. Ease. The truck was silent for 3 seconds. Then Danny said, Ease, he's going to call the bar again. I know, Emily said. Ease. She was already texting Tina. 4 words, he's checking. Ease, back me up. Tina's response came in 90 seconds. Ease told me just walked in. Go. Emily exhaled. Pete said, Ease from the far end of the seat. You okay? I'm okay, Emily said. Ease. But she knew the window had gotten smaller. Derek was suspicious now, not certain. He's not ready to act, but the instinct he had for control was up and moving. And once that instinct was awake, it did not go back to sleep easily. She looked at Danny in the rear view. Can we go faster, she said. Danny pressed the accelerator. Ryder was waiting for them in the parking lot of the FBI's Phoenix field office. He was in his jacket and his boots and his road-worn self, looking no different than he looked at the iron spur bar. And the sight of him standing there in the morning sun against the backdrop of a federal building was one of those images that stayed the kind that the brain marks as significant before the conscious mind fully registers why. Emily got out of the truck and he looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen the first night straight. Direct, without any of the cautious softening people usually applied when they looked at her, and he said, you made it. We made it, Emily said. He held the door. They went in. Flores was 47. Latino, with the compact efficiency of someone who had spent 2 decades in financial crimes and had developed a particular allergy to wasted time. He shook hands with each of them. At the door of the conference room, Sandra first. Then Pete, then Emily, and when he got to Emily, he held her hand a half-second longer and said, thank you for coming. I understand what it took, Emily said. Let's make it worth it. Flores almost smiled. They sat down. For the next 3 hours, they laid it out. Sandra went first, because Sandra's files were the architecture, the broad structural picture of how Derek's operation functioned, the shell companies and the dependency networks and the cultivation of officials over years. She had organized everything chronologically and cross-referenced by name. And she walked Flores through it with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this in her head for 2 years and was finally saying it out loud to someone with the power to act on it. Flores asked questions, good ones, specific pointed questions that told Emily he had been doing his homework since Curtis Webb's first call. Then Pete laid the lockbox on the table and opened it and took out the check. Flores looked at it for a long time without touching it. You never cashed this, he said. No, Pete said. Why not? Pete looked at the check, because cashing it felt like agreeing to the story they were telling. That my termination was legitimate, that I'd been treated fairly. He looked up. I knew I hadn't been treated fairly. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do about it. Flores picked up a pen and made a note. Then he looked at Emily. Mrs. Carter, he said, I understand you have photographs. Emily opened her bag and took out the envelope and slid it across the table. Flores opened it carefully and went through the 11 prints one by one. The same way Danny had done in the truck slowly, tilting them toward the light. When he got to the photograph of the handwritten note, he stopped. He looked at it for a long time. This is Derek Holloway's handwriting, he said. Yes, Emily said. I've seen his handwriting every day for 15 years. That's his. And you photographed this in his office? In his office. During a city council meeting he attended. The documents were on his desk. I had approximately 25 minutes. She kept her voice level. I used a disposable camera I purchased with cash. I had the photographs developed at a drugstore in a town 30 miles from Red Hollow. Also with cash. I kept the originals and never made copies because I was concerned about where copies might surface. Flores was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. How long ago, he said. 5 years, Emily said. He set the photograph down. Mrs. Carter, he said carefully. Ease. Why didn't you come forward with these 5 years ago? The question sat in the room. Ease. Emily had prepared for it. She had known it was coming. Ease. But hearing it out loud from a federal agent across a table, she found that the prepared answer dissolved, and what came out instead was simply the truth. Ease. Because I had no money of my own, she said. Because I had no one I trusted. Ease. Because my husband has people in Red Hollow who report to him. Ease. And I had already watched what happened when Sandra tried to go through the county DA. Ease. Because I was scared. She held Flores's gaze. And because I needed to find the right person to bring them to. Ease. And that took 5 years. Flores looked at her for a moment. Ease. Then he looked at Ryder, who had been sitting at the end of the table through all of this with the particular quality of stillness that was not passivity but something more like a coiled readiness. Ease. You're the one who found her, Flores said. She found herself, Ryder said. Ease. I just happened to be there when she was ready. Flores turned back to the photographs. Ease. I'm going to need to get these to our forensics team, he said. Ease. We'll verify the documents and the photographs against county records. Ease. Cross-reference financial data with Sandra's files. He looked at Pete. Ease. The check is going to be significant. The account number connects the shell company infrastructure to the individual. That's a thread that's hard to sever. He looked around the table. Ease. I want to be honest with you all. This is going to take some time to build into a formal case. Ease. Weeks, not days. We do this correctly, or we don't do it at all. We understand that, Sandra said immediately. Ease. What I need from each of you is a formal statement today. Ease. And I need your commitment that none of this leaves this room until I tell you it can. He looked at Emily specifically. Ease. That means going home, living your normal life, not giving Derek Holloway any reason to suspect what's in motion. Emily held his gaze. Ease. How long, she said. 3 weeks, Flores said. Maybe 4. Ease. Can you do that? 3 to 4 more weeks in that house. Ease. 3 to 4 more weeks of building the face, cooking the dinners. Ease. Monitoring the exits. She thought about Michael. She thought about 11 photographs wrapped in a cotton pillowcase for 5 years. Ease. Yes, she said. I can do that. They gave their statements. Ease. It took the rest of the morning and into the early afternoon. Ease. Each of them in a separate room with Flores or one of his colleagues. Ease. Speaking into a recorder, answering questions. Emily's statement took the longest 90 minutes. Ease. Covering everything from the day she found the documents on Derek's desk to the morning she drove away from the house. She was precise. She was thorough. She did not editorialize. Ease. She said what she knew. Ease. What she had seen. Ease. What she had documented. Ease. And she did not allow herself to feel anything about it until she was back in the hallway outside the room. Ease. And then she stood against the wall for a moment and breathed. Ease. Ryder was in the hallway. He didn't say anything. He just stood near her. Ease in that quiet way he had, and let the moment pass at its own pace. Ease. I feel strange, she said. What kind of strange? Like something is lighter. She looked at her hands. Ease. I've been carrying that in my body for years, the knowing of it. Ease. The photographs and the secret and the fear that he'd find out I had them and the fear that they'd never matter anyway. She looked up. Ease. I just told a federal agent everything. It's not my secret anymore. No, Ryder said. Ease. It's not. She exhaled. Does feel like what you thought it would, he said. Ease. She thought about it honestly. Better, she said. Ease. It feels better than I thought. They drove back to Red Hollow in the afternoon. Ease. Sandra went back to her motel, packed the rest of her things. Ease. And headed to Sedona with Flores's number in her phone and 2 years of organized files now in the hands of the federal government. Ease. She and Emily stood by their cars before she left and said goodbye with the particular warmth that comes from having shared something real. Ease. Something that doesn't need much ceremony because the ceremony happened in the doing of it. Ease. I'll see you on the other side of this, Sandra said. Ease. Yes, Emily said, you will. Pete went home to his wife, Ease, who had known for 6 years that her husband had been wronged and had spent 6 years watching him carry it. Ease. And when he walked in and told her that an FBI agent in Phoenix now had their check and their statement, Ease, she sat down at the kitchen table and cried, and Pete sat next to her and held her hand. Ease. And for the first time in 6 years, he felt like he could breathe all the way in. Ease. Emily went back to the iron spur. She went to the kitchen and she put on her apron and she started the dinner prep because the dinner prep needed to happen and because routine was the armor she wore and she was not done wearing it yet. Ease. Tina came in at 4 and looked at her and Emily looked back and they both understood, without saying it, that something had shifted today in a way that didn't need to be narrated. You okay, Tina said. Better than okay, Emily said. Don't ask me anything else. Not here. Tina nodded and went to fill the salt shakers. Derek came into the iron spur that evening at 6:15. He never came into the iron spur in 12 years. He had been inside the bar perhaps 4 times, and each time for a specific reason, a town event. A council meeting held there once when the community center was being renovated. A moment of deliberate public visibility that he timed and managed and controlled the way he controlled everything. He did not drink there. He did not eat there. The bar was Emily's domain, and he had always treated that as a boundary, not out of respect but out of strategy. Because showing up in her space too often would signal a kind of anxiety he did not want visible. He walked in at 6:15 on a Monday evening and sat down at the bar. Tina saw him first. She kept her face completely neutral, which was the single most difficult thing she had done in 9 years of service work. And she walked over and said, "Mr. Holloway, what can I get you?" "Just water," Derek said. Is Emily around?" "In the kitchen," Tina said. "She's in the middle of dinner service." Is there something I can help you with?" "I just wanted to check in," he said pleasantly. She mentioned she was tired this morning. I wanted to make sure she was managing." Tina looked at him. She looked at the man who had spent 12 years managing Emily Carter into nothing. Who had closed a bank account and monitored a phone and built a network of informants in a small town to keep one woman contained. Who was sitting at her bar with a glass of water, talking about wanting to check on his wife's fatigue. She looked at him and she smiled. "That's so thoughtful," she said. "I'll let her know you're here." She went to the kitchen pass-through. "Derek's at the bar," she said quietly. Emily's hands did not stop moving. She was plating an order, clean and precise. And she finished the plate before she responded. "Tell him I'll be out in 10 minutes, she said. "Tell him we're slammed." Tina relayed the message. Derek sat at the bar and drank his water and looked around the room with the practiced ease of a man who is doing surveillance while appearing to be doing nothing. He looked at the kitchen door. He looked at the pass-through. He looked at Tina, who smiled at him again. He could feel it the way you feel a room that has changed, when you're not supposed to know it's changed. The furniture is the same. The people are the same. But something in the air had a different density, a different temperature. And he had spent 20 years trusting that feeling, and he trusted it now. Something had happened today. He did not know what. Emily came out of the kitchen 10 minutes later, exactly when she said she would. Apron on, hair slightly damp from the heat of the kitchen. Every inch the woman who had been running that kitchen since 5:30 in the morning. She came around the bar and kissed his cheek, which she had stopped doing spontaneously years ago, but which she did now with the easy practice of someone reclaiming a gesture to use as a tool. "This is a surprise," she said. "I was in the area," he said. "You seemed off this morning." "I was tired." "I'm always tired on Mondays." She wiped her hands on her apron. "You eating?" "I can have something out in 15 minutes. He looked at her. She looked back, level, direct, unhurried. He had noticed the directness in the last week, and it had bothered him in a way he hadn't been able to fully articulate. Emily had always been careful with eye contact, not submissive. Not cowering. Just careful. The way prey animals are careful. Always slightly angled away from the thing that could hurt them. This was different. This was the gaze of someone who had made a decision. He just didn't know what the decision was yet. "Sure," he said. "Whatever's good." She went back to the kitchen. He sat at the bar and ate his dinner and watched her move through the pass-through and talked pleasantly to Tina about the weather and the road construction on Route 9. And when he left at 8 o'clock, he thanked her for the meal and tipped well and drove home. He sat in his car in his own driveway for a long time. Then he picked up the burner phone. The man in Kingman called back at 9:15. Ease. He told Derek what it would cost to have certain records made to disappear from a county database. Ease. Derek told him to find out first whether any copies had already left the county. Ease. Because making a record disappear was useless if the relevant parties already had it. Ease. The man in Kingman said he'd need 48 hours. Ease. Derek said he didn't have 48 hours. The man in Kingman said then it would cost more. Ease. Derek said fine. He hung up. He went inside. Emily was already in bed. Ease. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched her sleeping or appearing to sleep, and he felt something he very rarely felt. Ease. The specific cold discomfort of a situation he did not fully understand. Ease. He prided himself on understanding situations. He had built his entire life on the premise that he could read people and rooms and leverage and risk before anyone else in the room had finished taking their jacket off. Ease. He had been right often enough that he had stopped seriously entertaining the possibility of being wrong. Ease. He was entertaining it now. He went back to his office. Ease. He spent the night there, going through everything he could access about Derek's operation, his own records. Ease. His own system, looking for the breach, looking for the point of entry. Ease. Looking for what they had found and how they had found it. Ease. He did not think about Sandra's organized files because he had no way of knowing how thorough they were. Ease. He did not think about Pete Garza's lockbox because he had assumed that loose end had been managed. Ease. He did not think about a disposable camera purchased with coins from a laundry jar. Ease. Because in 12 years, it had never once occurred to him that the woman he had been most careful to keep powerless had been the most dangerous person in his life the entire time. Ease. He would not understand any of that until it was far too late. Ease. Ryder called Emily on Tuesday morning. Ease. She was in the car. Ease driving to the bar alone. Ease. And she answered on the second ring. Ease. Flores moved faster than he expected, Ryder said. Ease. The check cleared forensics in 12 hours. The account number connects to 2 of the shell companies. Ease. They matched Sandra's documentation. They pulled the county contract records, and they found the bidding irregularities independently. Ease. Which means they don't need our documentation as the primary source. They can use it as corroboration. Emily pulled over. Ease. She sat in the car on the side of the road. What does that mean? She said. Ease. It means the case is stronger than Flores anticipated, Ryder said. Ease. It means his 3 to 4 week timeline might be shorter. Ease. He said he'd have more clarity by Friday. A pause. Ease. Emily. He called the DA's office this morning. Not to tip them off, Flores has a way of doing that that makes it look like routine interagency communication. Ease. He was testing the response. He told me the response confirmed what you told him about Derek having a contact there. Emily's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Ease. So they know about the DA, she said. They know about the DA, Ryder confirmed. Ease. Which means the county DA is now part of the investigation. Ease. Not a resource for it. Another pause. This is bigger than Flores expected when we walked in yesterday morning. Ease. He said these things normally take months. This one has enough documentation. Ease. Enough independent corroboration. Enough willing witnesses that the timeline is compressed. His voice was steady and deliberate. He's giving her each piece at the weight it deserved. He said, Ease. Be ready. Ready for what specifically? For things to move fast when they move, Ryder said. Ease. For it to be over before you expected it to be over. Emily sat on the side of the road and breathed. Ease. She thought about the note she'd left on the kitchen counter that morning. Ease. Early shift. Back by noon. The same note she had left 1,000 times before. Ease. Derek had read it and gone back to bed, and she had driven away, and she had answered her phone, and a federal agent named Flores had moved faster than expected, and the case was stronger than anticipated. Ease. And the county DA was now part of the investigation. Ease. Ryder, she said. Yeah. When it's over, she said. Ease. When it's actually completely over. I want to open something. Ease. A cafe or a small restaurant or something that's mine. Ease. Completely mine. My name on the door, my kitchen, my rules. A pause. Ease. Yeah, Ryder said. Ease. And his voice had something in it she hadn't heard from him before, something warm and uncomplicated. Ease. The way warmth sounds when it doesn't have any strategy in it. Ease. That sounds right. I've been thinking about it for years, she said. Ease. I never let myself think about it seriously because I couldn't afford to. Ease. But I've been thinking about it. Then we make sure you get there, Ryder said. Ease. She pulled back onto the road. She drove to the Iron Spur and she went to her kitchen and she started her prep list and she worked through the morning with the specific focus of someone counting down to something. Ease. Though she didn't know exactly what she was counting down to yet. Ease she would know by Friday. Flores had said, be ready. Ease. She was ready. She had been ready for 12 years. Ease. She had just been waiting for the door. Thursday arrived with Derek, saying very little at breakfast. Ease. He moved through the kitchen with a careful quiet that Emily recognized, not the quiet of a man who was calm, but the quiet of a man who was watching. Ease. He poured his coffee, and he read his paper, and he said nothing about the evening he'd spent in his office, and nothing about the burner phone, and nothing about the calls he'd made. Ease. And the silence between them had a texture to it that was different from every other silence in 12 years of silences. Ease. Emily made eggs. She put them on his plate. She sat across from him with her coffee. Ease. She ate. He watched her over the top of his paper with the particular attention of a man trying to catch a reflection in water that keeps moving. Ease. You seem good. I feel good, she said. Ease. I've been sleeping better. He looked at her. She looked back. Ease. Good, he said. He folded his paper. He went to work. Ease. Emily sat at the table after he left and held her coffee cup in both hands and looked at the kitchen she had cooked in for 12 years. Ease. The house she had lived in for 12 years. The life that had been built around her like a cage so gradually that she had almost stopped being able to see the bars. Ease, she thought. 3 to 4 weeks. Maybe shorter, she thought. Ease. Be ready. She was ready. She had been ready since the night she pulled a disposable camera out of a drugstore bag and stood in her husband's office with shaking hands and photographed the proof of who he really was. She had just needed, for 5 years, someone to bring it to. She got up, rinsed her cup, and drove to work. Friday was 1 day away, and Flores had a call to make. Flores called on Friday at 8:17 in the morning. Emily was in the kitchen at the Iron Spur, 40 minutes into her prep. And when her phone buzzed and she saw the Phoenix area code, she set down the knife she was holding and pressed the phone to her ear and said nothing. She just listened. Flores spoke for 4 minutes. When he finished, Emily said when. Flores said Monday. She hung up. She stood at the prep table with both hands flat on the surface and breathed through her nose for 10 full seconds. The exhaust fan ran. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere out in the bar, Tina was unlocking the front door and dragging in the sidewalk sign and doing the ordinary mechanical work of starting a day that was, for everyone else in Red Hollow, completely ordinary. For Emily Carter, Monday meant the end of 12 years. She picked up the knife and went back to work. She had 3 days. She called Ryder from her car during the lunch break. He picked up before the second ring, which told her he'd been waiting. Flores called, she said. I know. He called me. After you. Ryder's voice was steady. Monday. Federal warrant. They're moving on Holloway's business records simultaneously with a separate team handling the county commissioner's office. They want it coordinated so neither side has time to warn the other. Emily watched a truck go by on Route 9. The DA? The DA is being handled separately by the state attorney general's office. Flores went above him entirely. He has enough on the corruption angle to pull the DA into the investigation as a subject. He's not a participant. A pause, he can't prosecute himself. Someone else is coming in. Emily absorbed that. Derek doesn't know, she said. Derek is still making calls on a burner phone, trying to find out what's moving, Ryder said. The man in Kingman he hired, we know about him. Flores knows about him. He made 2 calls to county records offices on Tuesday trying to pull certain documents. Both calls were logged. Both became part of the file. His voice had a quiet satisfaction in it that was not triumphant but simply resolved. The sound of a thing coming to its correct conclusion. Every move Derek makes to cover his tracks is becoming evidence of consciousness of guilt. He's been digging the hole deeper every day this week without knowing it. Emily thought about Derek at the breakfast table on Thursday. The careful quiet, the watching. The I seem good and her I feel good, and the complete performance of 2 people who both knew something was wrong and neither of them naming it. He's going to know it was me, she said. Ryder said. He didn't soften it. He is. I need to not be in that house when it happens, she said. You won't be, Ryder said. Saturday night, you go to Tina's. Please. Tell Derek you're covering a sick employee, staying over so you can open Sunday morning. Please. By Monday morning, when it moves, you're not in that house. A pause. Please. I'll have 2 people in Red Hollow this weekend, not visible. Please, just present. Emily leaned her head back against the headrest. Please. She thought about 11 photographs in a cotton pillowcase. Please. She thought about coins in a laundry jar. She thought about a 30-second window at a kitchen sink where she let herself feel things and then turned the water off and put the face back on. She thought, 3 more days. Ryder, she said. Yeah. Tell me about Michael, she said. Please. Tell me something about him I don't know. Something from when he was with your chapter. A pause. Please. A real one. The kind that means a person is going somewhere in their memory that has both weight and warmth. He used to sing, Ryder said. Country music, mostly. Bad country music. The kind that sounds like it was written in 20 minutes by someone who'd been crying into a beer. He had a terrible voice and no awareness of that fact whatsoever. A short sound that was almost a laugh. We'd be riding and he'd just start going. Didn't matter who was around. He sang the way some people just talk, like the sound was meant to go somewhere, and the outside air was as good a place as any. Another pause. He used to say his sister could make a meal out of nothing. That she could walk into an empty kitchen and walk out 20 minutes later with something that made you feel like everything was going to be all right. Ryder stopped. I've eaten at your bar for 6 years. He was right. Emily pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. He could not sing, she said. Her voice was thick, but held. He was genuinely terrible. He thought he was exceptional. He was completely certain of it, Ryder said. He used to sing in the car on road trips, and I would beg him to stop and he would just get louder. She exhaled something that was half grief and half a real laugh. The first real laugh she'd had in longer than she could locate. God, I miss him. I know, Ryder said. They were quiet for a moment together on the phone. 2 people holding the same absence from different sides. He'd be furious that it took this long, Emily said finally. He'd be furious, Ryder agreed. And then he'd be so damn proud of you he wouldn't know what to do with himself. Emily sat up straight. Okay, she said. Okay, Ryder said. She went back inside and finished the lunch service and didn't let herself think about Monday until Saturday came. Saturday night, she packed 1 bag. She packed the things she actually needed: documents. Her mother's ring, a photograph of Michael that she had kept in the inside cover of her bedside book for 11 years. She packed clothes for 3 days. She packed the journal she had been writing in secretly for the last 4 years. In handwriting, small enough to look like a personal diary and vague enough to be undecipherable to anyone who didn't know the code she had developed for herself. She told Derek she was covering for a sick employee. He looked at the bag. Overnight? He said. Tina's place, Emily said. I told you she's sick. I need to open Sunday, and it's easier than driving back. Derek looked at the bag. He looked at her. Something passed through his expression that she had never seen there before. Not suspicion exactly. Something older and more primal than suspicion. The expression of a person who is beginning to understand, at the cellular level, that the ground they have been standing on is not as solid as they believed. You could just drive back, he said. Derek. She kept her voice even. It's 40 minutes each way. I'd be up at 4. Let me just stay at Tina's. He said nothing. She picked up the bag. She kissed his cheek. She walked out. She drove 3 blocks. Turned the corner. Pulled over. And sat in the car shaking for 90 seconds. Not from fear. From the release of having done the last hard thing, the last performance. The last face. The last kiss on a cheek she had spent 12 years pretending she didn't resent. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs and breathed through it, and when it passed, she was steadier than she had been in days. She drove to Tina's. Tina opened the door before she knocked. She pulled Emily inside and hugged her, the kind of hug that doesn't ask permission or offer explanation. Just delivers itself fully. And Emily stood in Tina's hallway and accepted it, and felt the last of the performance she'd been wearing fall off her like something that had never belonged there. "Geez, you okay?" Tina said. "I just walked out of that house for the last time," Emily said. "Geez, I'm more than okay." Ryder's two men were already in Red Hollow. Geez. Pete and Hollis had come down Saturday afternoon in the truck. Geez. Checked into the motel on the highway side of town. Geez. And spent the evening being visible in the ways that didn't matter at the diner. He's at the gas station and invisible in the ways that did. Geez. They had Ryder's number and Flores' emergency line and clear instructions. Geez. Watch the house. Watch the bar. Call if Derek moved in any direction that looked like he understood what was coming. Geez. He didn't move. Derek spent Saturday evening in his office. Geez. And whatever he was doing in there, he did it quietly. Geez. And Pete and Hollis drove past the house at 11, and the lights were still on, and everything looked like a man trying to outthink something he couldn't see clearly. Geez. Sunday passed the same way. Emily worked the bar. She made biscuits. Geez. She took orders and filled plates and talked to regulars about nothing that mattered and felt, geez, for the first time in a long time, entirely present in the work, not using it as a system, is geez, not using it as armor, just doing it because she was good at it and it was hers, and on Monday that fact was going to be incontestable. Geez. Derek called her at 3 in the afternoon. "How's it going?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Busy. Sunday crowd." "You sound different," he said. "I'm tired," she said. "I'll call you tonight." She hung up. She went back to the kitchen. She did not call him that night. Monday morning arrived the way decisive mornings do, ordinary on the surface. Everything underneath it moving. At 7:45, 3 federal vehicles left the Phoenix field office heading north toward Red Hollow. Agent Flores was in the lead car with 2 colleagues and a federal warrant covering Derek Holloway's business offices, financial records, personal banking, and 3 of the shell company addresses that Danny had identified and Sandra's documentation had confirmed. At 7:50, a separate team from the state attorney general's office arrived at the county DA's office and presented a different warrant, this one covering communications between the DA and Derek Holloway going back 6 years. At 8 o'clock, a third team arrived at the county commissioner's office. Coordinated, simultaneous. No phone calls between them. No window for anyone to warn anyone else. Ryder got the call from Flores at 7:48, 2 words. "It's moving," he called Emily. She was at Tina's kitchen table with coffee she hadn't been drinking because her stomach wouldn't hold it. And when the phone rang, she knew before she answered. "It's moving," Ryder said. Emily set the coffee cup down on the table with complete steadiness. "Okay," she said. "Stay at Tina's. Don't go to the bar yet. Give it 2 hours." "Okay," she said again. She hung up. Tina was standing in the kitchen doorway looking at her. "It's moving," Emily said. Tina sat down across from her. They waited together. Derek Holloway was at his desk at 8:15 when the knock came. He knew. He knew before he opened the door. There was something about the quality of the knock, not the casual knock of a client or a contractor, but the knock of someone who already has authority and is announcing it rather than requesting entry, that told him everything before he turned the handle. 3 federal agents, a warrant, his assistant standing behind them in the reception area, looking at Derek with an expression he would remember for a long time, not surprise, which he might have expected, but something closer to relief. Derek looked at the warrant. He looked at the agents. He said, "I want my lawyer." "You can call your lawyer," Flores said. He was calmer than Derek expected. He had the manner of a man who had done this many times and had no interest in drama. "You can call him right now. We're going to wait here while you do. And then we're going to begin." Derek called his lawyer. While he was on the phone, one of the other agents began a methodical review of the filing cabinets along the far wall. Another positioned himself near the computer. Derek watched them while he talked to his lawyer. And the words his lawyer was saying registered in some functional part of his brain while the rest of him was doing something he had not done in 20 years of building and maneuvering and controlling and strategizing. He was trying to figure out where it had come from. What had broken? What piece of the machine had given way? He went through the list. Sandra Pruitt, yes, he'd known she was a risk. He's Pete Garza possible. The county commissioner, the DA, the shell companies, all of those were possible breach points. All of them had vulnerabilities he had identified and managed and reassessed over the years. He had not put Emily on the list. In 12 years, he had never put Emily on the list. He had been so thorough about dismantling her that he had stopped thinking of her as a variable at all. She was a managed element. She was contained. She was the woman who cried quietly at a kitchen sink and then put on her apron and went back to work and never, these 12 years, had done a single thing he hadn't anticipated. He hung up the phone. He looked at Flores. "How long have you been building this?" he said. "Long enough," Flores said. "Who came to you?" Derek said. His voice was still controlled, still the voice of a reasonable man asking a reasonable question. Was it Pruitt, the Garza man? Flores looked at him without expression. Mr. Holloway, I'd encourage you to wait for your lawyer." Derek nodded slowly. He sat back down in his chair. He thought about Emily making eggs on Thursday morning. Emily meeting his eyes directly across the breakfast table. Emily kissing his cheek on Saturday evening with a steadiness that had felt wrong and that he hadn't been able to name. He thought about a cook in a bar kitchen who had cried quietly for 12 years and never once asked for anything and never once, as far as he had known, done a single unexpected thing. He thought, when? He thought, how long? What did she have? He would find out later, through his lawyer, about 11 photographs on a disposable camera. He would find out about coins in a laundry jar and a drugstore in a town 30 miles away and a cotton pillowcase in a dead man's box. He would find out about 5 years of waiting for the right person. When he found out, he sat with his lawyer in a conference room and said nothing for a very long time. Because there was nothing to say. The woman he had most thoroughly underestimated had been the one holding the key the entire time. Emily heard about the arrest from Ryder. He called at 10:20 to tell her that Derek had been taken into federal custody pending formal charges. That the county commissioner had been brought in for questioning and was already cooperating. And that the DA's office was under state review with an interim appointment being made by the governor's office within the week. She was still sitting at Tina's kitchen table. "It's done," she said. "The first part," Ryder said. "There'll be hearings. There'll be legal process. It's not over, but the part where he can reach you, that part is done. He's not coming back to that house, Emily. Not anytime soon." Emily put the phone face down on the table. She sat for a long moment. Tina was at the counter doing nothing. Just standing there waiting. "It's done," Emily said. Tina turned around. She didn't say anything. She opened her arms. And Emily Carter, who had held herself together through 12 years of a controlled and diminished life, not through 5 years of carrying evidence in a dead man's jacket, through 2 weeks of performing normalcy while a federal case was built around her testimony, finally let go. She cried the way she had never let herself cry, not the 30-second sync version, not the controlled, timed release, but the real thing, the full body kind, the kind that comes from so deep that it takes everything with it on the way up. Tina held her and didn't say a word. And the kitchen was warm, and the coffee had gone cold. And outside on the street, Red Hollow was going about its morning, completely unaware that the machine that had been running it for 7 years had just been switched off. Ryder came to Red Hollow that afternoon. He brought Danny and Pete and Hollis, and they came in the trucks the same as before. No ceremony, no announcement. They came to the Iron Spur at 2 o'clock. Well before the dinner crowd. And Emily was in the kitchen, of course she was in the kitchen. Where else would she be? And she came out when she heard them. She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the bar, and she looked at the 4 of them and she said, "I want to feed you." Danny looked at Ryder. Ryder said, "We were hoping you'd say that." She made them the best meal she had ever made in that kitchen. She made fried chicken that shattered and fell away and made Pete close his eyes when he bit into it. She made biscuits and gravy and a pecan pie she had been halfway through baking when Flores called that morning and had put back in the oven by 9 o'clock because she'd known somehow that she was going to need it today. She made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and she brought everything out herself. Plate by plate, and she sat at the end of the table they pushed together, and she ate with them. She hadn't eaten a meal at a table with other people in years. She had forgotten what it felt like to eat without monitoring. She ate. They talked about nothing important to drive down. The weather. A story Pete told about a horse he'd briefly and disastrously owned in 1987. They laughed, real laughter, the unperformed kind. Tina joined them at 3 o'clock after the delivery arrived and sat next to Emily and ate a biscuit and told Hollis he had crumbs on his jacket with the sisterly bluntness of someone who has decided she belongs at this table. Ryder sat across from Emily. He didn't say much. He rarely did. In groups. But he was there. Fully present. In the particular way he was always fully present. And Emily was aware of it, the way you become aware of something that has been present for longer than you realized and has finally been named. When the table was mostly cleared and Pete and Hollis had gone outside and Danny was helping Tina stack dishes in the kitchen. Ryder said quietly. You okay? Emily thought about the question. Not the reflexive answer, the 12-year answer, the real one. I don't know what I am yet, she said honestly. I think I'm going to need to figure out who I am without all of that before I know how I am. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Ryder said. I've been performing being okay for so long that I'm not sure I know what actual okay feels like. She looked at her hands on the table. I think it might feel like this though. Sitting here. Eating food I made. With people who came because they wanted to. She looked up. With people who knew my brother. Ryder's face did the thing it did when something landed in him, a slight shift. A settling like weight redistributing. He'd have sat right where Pete is sitting, Ryder said. He'd have eaten 3 pieces of chicken and taken the last biscuit without asking, and then looked completely innocent when anyone mentioned it. Emily laughed. It surprised her how easy it came, how it didn't hurt. How it felt like something that had been waiting for permission. He absolutely would have, she said. 3 weeks later, Emily Carter signed a lease. The space was on the main street of Red Hollow, 2 blocks from the Iron Spur, a building that had been a hardware store for 40 years before the hardware store moved to a bigger location on the highway. It had good bones, a functional kitchen and large front windows that let in the afternoon light in a way that made everything look warmer than it was. The lease had her name on it, just her name. She stood in the empty space with the signed papers in her hand and breathed the air of a room that belonged to her. And she thought about the woman who had arrived at the Iron Spur at 5:30 in the morning 12 years ago and tied on an apron and learned to disappear inside her own life. She thought that woman was braver than she ever got credit for. She thought that woman kept the photographs. She thought, that woman waited for the right person, and then she was ready when he came. The cafe opened 8 weeks later. She called it Michael's. No explanation on the sign, just the name, in clean letters above the door. People in Red Hollow assumed it was named after a family member, which was true, and they didn't ask more than that, which was fine. The people who knew what the name meant knew it completely, and that was enough. Sandra Pruitt drove down from Sedona for the opening. Pete Garza came with his wife, who shook Emily's hand and said, I mean that. Curtis Webb sent flowers, which arrived that morning in a vase too big for any of the tables, and so ended up on the counter by the register where everyone could see them. And at 11 o'clock, 4 motorcycles pulled up outside. Ryder and Danny and Pete and Hollis in their jacks in the desert sun, parking in a row, with the easy confidence of men who go where they're welcome and know it. Emily came out from behind the counter when they walked in. She had a dish towel in her hand, which she always had. And she was wearing an apron that said Michael's in the same letters as the sign, which she had made herself. And she looked at them in the doorway of the thing she had built. The thing that had her name behind it. The kitchen that was hers. And she said, you're going to need to sit down because I have been cooking since 5 this morning and you are going to eat everything I put in front of you. Danny said, Yes, ma'am. They sat down. She fed them. The charges against Derek Holloway were filed 6 weeks after his arrest. Ease. 19 counts spanning federal contract fraud, financial corruption, ease, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and 2 additional counts related to the intimidation of Sandra Pruitt following her initial report to the county DA because witness intimidation. Flores had told Emily when he called with the final count, ease, left its own paper trail when the person being intimidated was thorough enough to document it. Ease. Sandra had documented it. The county commissioner pled guilty on 8 counts and cooperated fully with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Ease. The county DA resigned before charges were formally brought and accepted a state bar suspension that effectively ended his legal career. Ease. The man in Kingman was charged separately. The shell companies were dissolved by court order. Ease. 7 county contracts were voided and rebid through a process overseen by a federal monitor. Ease. Derek Holloway hired 3 lawyers and pled not guilty to everything. Ease. It didn't matter. The case was airtight. Emily knew it was airtight because Flores had told her so. Ease. And she knew Flores meant it because he said it in the same flat. His factual voice he used for everything. Without embellishment or reassurance. Ease. Just information delivered accurately. She testified 3 months later in a federal courtroom in Phoenix. Ease. She wore a dark blue dress and her mother's ring, and she sat in the witness chair and told the truth for 94 minutes. Ease. Calmly and completely without looking at Derek once. Ease. She didn't need to look at him. She had spent 12 years looking at him. Ease. She was done. Ryder was in the courtroom that day. Ease. He sat in the gallery with Danny and said nothing through the entire 94 minutes. Ease. When Emily finished and stepped down from the witness stand and walked up the aisle to where the gallery was, Ease. She stopped briefly at the row where he was sitting. Ease. He looked up at her. She held his gaze for a moment with that direct look she had reclaimed, the one that had taken 12 years to steal and 2 weeks to get back. Ease. She said quietly, "Thank you for sitting down." He understood exactly what she meant. Ease. He said, "Thank you for talking." She walked out. Ease. Derek Holloway was convicted on 16 of the 19 counts 8 months after his arrest. Ease. He was sentenced to 11 years. He was taken out of the courtroom through a side door. Ease. Which is how these things end, not with the dramatic reckoning of a man finally facing what he's done. Ease. But with the bureaucratic efficiency of a system processing a case that has been closed. Emily was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. Ease. She was at Michael's making the Friday lunch service. Ease. Because the Friday lunch service needed to happen and because she had stopped organizing her life around Derek Holloway. Flores called to tell her. She said, "Thank you, Agent Flores." Ease. For doing this correctly. He said, "Thank you for keeping those photographs for 5 years." She said, "Ease. I always knew they'd matter. I just needed the right person to bring them to." She hung up. Ease. She went back to the grill. Tina came by at noon with flowers, not grand ones. Ease. Just wild flowers she'd picked from the edge of the highway. Ease. The kind of flowers that grow where nothing should grow and do it anyway. Ease. Because they are that kind of flower. Emily put them in a glass of water on the counter by the register. Ease. Right where Curtis Webb's opening day flowers had been. Ease. And she went back to work. At 3 o'clock, when the lunch crowd had cleared and the afternoon had gone quiet, Ease. She stood in the kitchen of the restaurant she owned, and she looked at the wildflowers, and she thought about a woman who had learned to hide pain better than anyone. Ease. Who had cried at a kitchen sink for 30 seconds every night, and then turned off the water and put herself back together and gone on. Ease. She thought about the coins in the laundry jar. She thought about the disposable camera. Ease. She thought about a card left on a counter that she had not picked up but had memorized before she left the room. Ease. She thought about Michael singing in the car on road trips, with a voice like a screen door in a windstorm. Ease. Completely certain he was wonderful. And she thought about how some people go through life, leaving gifts they don't know they're leaving. Ease. Setting up nets they don't know will catch someone. Ease. Making promises that take 11 years to keep. She thought, Ease. I was never alone. I was always surrounded by people who were coming. Ease. I just had to stay alive long enough to let them arrive. Ease. Emily Carter had done that. She had stayed. She had kept the photographs. Ease. She had waited for the right person. And on the day everything finally opened up, She had been ready, not because someone saved her, but because she had never, in 12 years of a diminished and controlled life, stopped saving herself. The kitchen was warm. The wildflowers were bright in the afternoon light. And outside the window of the restaurant that bore her brother's name, Red Hollow went about its day in a town that was finally, exactly what it had always pretended to be, a place where people looked after each other. Because one woman had refused to stop believing that was possible. And one man had asked the question no one else had thought to ask. And a promise made at a gravesite 11 years ago had finally completely been kept.